Welcome everyone, it's Dadhichi here with the introduction to August 2017, and slight departure from the way I normally do things here with the charts up on the screen for you to see exactly what I'm talking about and notes in hand. The reason for this is this month is a particularly important one, given that on the 21st we have a total solar eclipse here, as you can see, and I wanted to take a look at the US horoscope, and we'll look at that first to see exactly how this is impacting upon the US generally. And of course, if that's impacting upon the US, it's most definitely going to impact upon world affairs. And where astrologers and astronomers and scientists differ, I guess, is that rather than studying these things as a purely intellectual exercise, astrologers are particularly interested in how these eclipses impact upon us as human beings. This one is especially important for the United States in that the eclipse cuts, or rather the eclipse shadow cuts the US diagonally in half. So whenever an eclipse occurs and that eclipse is visible in a specific country, and this one is a total eclipse, this is going to be an important one and is going to have marked ramifications for the future of the US. They also generally tend, from my experience, and I've made a few predictions over the last 30 years which have been bang on, but we can't always be certain. And mind you, I'm going to say straight up that not all eclipses are bad, and there are some pros and cons for this one, but they usually have an impact on the head of the nation. And I want to have a look at Donald Trump's horoscope in a moment to show you just how significant this eclipse is in terms of the way it looks against his horoscope. But first, here we see the eclipse impacting the 9th house of the US horoscope. Now, there's some debate over the correct time of the US horoscope, but doing a little bit of research, this one here is the one that I'm using, and it shows this eclipse here, which is the Sun-Moon node, and also the close proximity of Mars, the warring planet, here in this 9th house of the judiciary, legalities and foreign nations, foreign embassies, that type of thing. Usually I see the eclipses have an impact almost immediately, but eclipses generally falling on the eastern horizon manifest within around 4 months. If they fall, that's the eastern horizon here. If they fall near the midheaven, which we see here, the midheaven is here, but close enough it's moving up to this southern part of the horoscope. It usually will give its effects between 6 to 8 months. And if it falls on the western horizon, strangely this is sort of midway between, then it would usually be between 8 and 12 months. So we could sort of say here between 8 and 10 months maybe we start to see the full impact of this eclipse. I've said there in my notes, in my article there, which we're going to give you a link to later on, that's around 9 months that I think the the full impact of this eclipse will be felt. It's not actually easy for astrologers to determine the effects of the eclipse, and astrologers generalize mostly for what's happening. So more research is necessary on this. In the case of this eclipse, and it is being coined the Great Eclipse of 2017, there are some very pertinent features that we need to look at. Firstly, it's visible in the US starting in Madras, Oregon, around 9:06 a.m. and the shadow will be approximately 70 miles wide. So it's going to be visible to a large number of people. It will ultimately conclude in Columbia, South Carolina at around 2:44 p.m. on that same day. And so we see the power of this eclipse. Some have said there's no solar eclipse for the last 70 years visible in the US, but actually that's not correct. March 7th, 1970, there was an eclipse. It covered the states of Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina, along with Virginia and Nantucket. There are also other total solar eclipses, for example in February 1979, July 1991, which was only visible in Hawaii. And so it appears that even with the astrological fraternity, eclipses that don't necessarily have major global ramifications are completely sidestepped and left out of the picture. There are some pretty significant eclipses, such as the one in 1918 and the lunar eclipses that were leading up to that, which were heralding the beginning of the First World War. And some of the others you can see seem to coincide historically with pretty important events, sociologically, economically and politically, with the deaths of some of those leaders also being implicated. Now at this time, if we take a look, here we see that during this eclipse, Saturn is transiting the first house, the rising sign. You note here, as I said earlier, you need to be careful that you don't jump on the bandwagon of everything being totally negative. Yes, there are some negative implications here. Firstly, we've seen this recent, well actually right now, this very almost exact opposition to Mars in the 7th house here of the US horoscope. Not a good aspect. However, Saturn is in a trine, a triangular aspect to the eclipse itself. Ordinarily we see Saturn and Mars playing out when there are such things as wars, especially if Pluto is involved in this. We see here Pluto is over here at 17 degrees of Capricorn, and it is in what we call a quincunx, 150 degree aspect to Mars. Mars being involved in this eclipse is not a good thing at all. You see it here, along with this north node, which accentuates, amplifies the energies of Mars. It's a competitive planet for the US horoscope, ruling the 5th house. It is also a planet of loss, ruling the 12th house. We also see here that just recently, in the last few months, there would have been a midpoint opposition here to Mars-Uranus. So there would have been a Mars-Uranus-Saturn connection here in the 7th house, which is not good. And now this eclipse in the 9th house, also not particularly that good. I've tried to narrow things down. I don't want to focus exclusively on the US because I am going to get to Donald Trump's chart. But the critical degree here, which is 28 degrees, I took a look through some of the other countries to check whether or not this eclipse has any impact. And these are the countries that I've come up with: South Africa, Iceland, South Vietnam, Israel, Maldives, Sudan, the Vatican, the Arab Republic, Qatar, Palestine, Italy, Ghana and Kuwait. These countries are also implicated by virtue of sensitive degrees being associated with that 28th degree in Leo of the total solar eclipse. Let's take a look at Donald Trump's horoscope. I want to have a look at the sidereal map here, which I think is more telling. I prefer the sidereal map. Here it's slightly different. You see that the position of Mars falls in Donald Trump's 12th house. However, the eclipse itself, with the Sun and Mercury, falls smack bang on his rising sign. And here we see the close proximity of his birth Mars to this eclipse point. This is not good, as I said earlier, when Mars is implicated. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is a dangerous period for Donald Trump. It's dangerous also because we see the malefic planets for his Leo ascendant, Saturn and Venus, contained here in the 12th house of subversive activities and hidden enemies. Saturn is also his open enemies. So here we see there's some collusion, and Venus for him is his 10th ruler, ruler of Taurus, which also, by the way, in his birth chart, rules this Rahu-Sun combination. There in the 12th house, this usually indicates a fall in his professional activities, and a fall which I would be saying will be brought about. Obviously he has so many enemies. My concern is that this could really be the tipping point for some extremist and some attempt on his life. If not an attempt on his life, these aspects, the eclipse itself, impacting upon his rising sign and his ascendant, I think is cause for concern over his health. He doesn't look good, and we see for a start that he's prone to argumentation, as I say here in my notes, fighting legal battles and getting even. The war narrative seems to be getting stronger, especially with North Korea. So in all likelihood we could start to see the movement here towards war, but also the movement towards war against him. So it's important to note on a social level, social unrest, uprisings, violence within the community, in particular to the authority and the government. There'll be natural catastrophes, earthquakes, and as I usually note, assassination or removal of the leaders of countries that are implicated in the eclipse, in this case the US very, very powerfully. I wanted to also indicate here that the transit of Saturn for him right now in his 4th house, that's over here. We see the 4th house being transited by Saturn. Saturn is the planet that rules his wife, as well as his enemies. It rules his 7th house as well as his 6th house. Therefore, we know with considerable certitude that he is not at all happy, and his marriage is in a bit of a ditch right now. That we're going to talk about on another occasion. Suffice to say that that aspect of Saturn here casts its full reverse square on this ascendant, although it may not be exactly it's actually a triangular aspect, but by house it's a square aspect. It's still impacting the latter part of the sign of Leo, and this may be a critical degree when some of these planets, the Sun for example, later in the month, around that time of eclipse, or shortly after, comes to the 27th degree. That will be sometime in September, so we'll be looking out for that. If you want to find out more about the Trump scenario, do take a look at the full article I've written. Is around 3,500 words, which goes into more detail. But I do want to talk a little more about the relationship he's having with his wife, and how this poor guy must be undergoing the most intense stresses imaginable. Basically, he's got everyone against him, the whole world really. Then, of course, at home he mustn't be very happy. So that is that creates ideal conditions for health crises, and I think you may see that if not, indeed, some attempt on his life at this time. I just wanted to talk also about one interesting facet of the eclipse, which has to do with a similar scenario that happens when it hasn't been raining for a long time in, say, desert areas, and all of a sudden a downpour. You start to see tadpoles and frogs. Eclipses are the same. There are certain viruses and bugs and sort of bacteria that spring to life under that shadow of the eclipse. So that's why I mentioned earlier too that it's likely there could be some problems associated with diseases, pestilence, some outbreaks of disease. The ancient Hindu astrologers said it's a perfect time for undergoing spiritual activities. And they normally say you should bathe yourself in water under the eclipse and do your prayers, your meditation, that sort of thing. Whatever is done under the eclipse is increased 1,000-fold. So obviously if you're doing spiritual work, working on yourself, those activities will be highlighted and strengthened under the eclipse. It's a time of spiritual attunement, and hopefully we don't see some of the very negative influences that are indicated by this eclipse. Hopefully they are lesser in measure, and I do hope this has given you a little bit more of an insight into how this eclipse may play out after August 21st. Thanks so much for joining me. Look forward to your company at astrology.com.au. Bye-bye for now.